All right, let's dive into chapter 4. So you should have in front of you your notes and whatever you would normally have in class to take to mark those notes up with. So whether you choose pen, pencil, colored pencils, highlighters, whatever you're used to using, I would suggest you still have those available. And then as we talk, maybe there's things you want to add in. There might be things I'll have you add in, maybe things you want to highlight or add to it. That's up to you. If you have any trouble with anything, please let me know. Don't let yourself fall behind. Make sure you're keeping up with everything that we're getting through. So, all right, let's jump into it. Chapter 4. First thing we got to look at is there's a couple of terms that you need to make sure that you know. And the first one is ecology. The prefixes in front of the word mean a bunch here in biology. So, for example, bio, hopefully you remember bio, like biology, means living, right? So biology, meaning to study, means the study of living things. Eco means the living and the non-living. So ecology is the study of the interactions between the organism and their living and non-living environment. So not just the grass and the bears and the bushes and the birds, but now we're actually talking about the water and the sunlight and the rocks and all of those other non-living components and how they all work together, how they mesh together. So this is going to start to blend a little bit of what we talked about in the cycles in the last unit back into the biology and how it fits in with some of this stuff. And we're going to add some other things in like sunlight and weather and stuff like that too. So that's ecology. Ecosystem is very similar. Remember eco, so we know automatically when we see eco it's living and non-living, is a community and its living and non-living environment. So now we're just talking about, if we talk about the grassland ecosystem, that means we're talking about all the living things that live in the grassland, all the plant species, all the animal species, but we're also talking about the non-living components. So what's the sunlight conditions like? What are the seasons like? What is the precipitation? All of those things would come into factor with ecosystems. And underneath there, you've got two different types of ecosystems that we're going to look at. The terrestrial ecosystem, which just means on land. So I would write that next to there in your notes. Terrestrial means land-based ecosystems. And aquatic ecosystems we're going to look at, and that just means in the water. And that would include everything from a stream to a pond to an ocean. If it's in the water, it's aquatic. If it's on land, it's terrestrial. All right. And when we're doing this, we're, again, because this is ecology, we're looking at both the living and the non-living factors. So we've got abiotic is another term. If you haven't heard that before, that means non-living. I would write that in your notes. And next to biotic factors, I would write the living things, or the factors that are influenced by those, or come directly from those living things. So we could write maybe a couple of examples here of some biotic and abiotic factors. So a good example of an abiotic factor might be something like sunlight. Maybe. Come on. My pencil doesn't want to work. Because it's dead. Okay. We'll try it this way. Okay, something like sunlight. It can be precipitation. Sorry for the messy writing. Hopefully my pencil will be charged for the other lesson, so it won't be so bad. And it could be like the mineral content of the soil. So we could put minerals. This would also include weather. This would include wind. Any of those kinds of, if it's not a living thing, but it has the ability to affect this, that would be considered an abiotic factor. So biotic factors then would be the opposite, the living things. So this could be your food supply. This could be maybe even competition. So do you have to compete with another species for your food? It could also be like nesting sites or breeding sites. All of those things that come from the living parts of the environment, those would all fit as the biotic factors. So when we're going through this, we're going to look at the abiotic factors and we're going to look at the biotic factors and how they both influence them. So make sure, especially those two terms, that you're really pretty clear on those terms. All right, let me jump out of here. Okay, the next term you need to know is a species. What is a species? So here's the definition that we're going to use. A group of organisms that look alike and can interbreed under normal conditions to produce fertile offspring. Now right away, I'm gonna underline some things here that I would suggest you underline. They have to be fertile offspring, meaning the offspring have to be able to also interbreed and have offspring. If you get offspring but they can't breed, that's not a species, that's not some new species. So let's look at a couple of examples here. For example, if you take a horse and a donkey, you probably are familiar with this interbreed. If you take a female horse and a male donkey, you get a mule. And mules are a little bit smaller than horses, but if you took a horse that was the same size as a mule, the mule would actually be much stronger. It has a mild temperament, kind of like a donkey, but it's stronger, makes great for pack animals, those kinds of trail animals, things like that. But oddly enough, if you take a male horse and a female donkey, you don't get a mule. They call it a hinny. It looks very similar, but it's slightly different. They're harder to get, and we don't need to get into the why. That's genetic kind of stuff that maybe you'll look at more in Bio 30. But they're a little bit different. They're a little bit different in appearance, in their temperament, in their size compared to a mule. But both of these examples, both the mule and the hinny, other than a few really rare examples, for the most part, they're sterile. You can't breed a mule to a hinny or a male mule to a female mule. It just won't work. That cross isn't viable. So even though you can cross these two animals and get something different, a different appearance, because that offspring is not is sterile, is basically not able to reproduce, we don't consider a mule or a hinny in this case a different species. They're the same. They're kind of a gray area, let's put it that way. They're not really a new species, they're not really the old species. They're just kind of something in the middle. Okay, another example. If you were to take a tiger and a lion, very similar to how the mule and the hinny works. If we take a female tiger and a male lion, then we get a liger. And oddly enough, the cross between these two tends to be bigger. So a liger would be bigger than the tiger or the lion parent, potentially, certain genes get shut off because of the cross, and they can actually be bigger than their parents. You'll notice that there's spots here farther over, but you'll notice that the female liger there has spots. Lions actually have genes for spots. It shows up in lion cubs, they'll have spots, and typically as they get older, those spots disappear, although some adults have kind of a real faint spot pattern left over. But for the most part, those spots disappear. But in the cross, they tend to be a little more predominant. You can see those spots a little bit more. Again, though, we can cross just like we did with the mule. If you take a male tiger and a female lion, you get a tigon rather than a liger. These ones don't tend to be bigger than the parents. They tend to be the same size as their parents, although you can still see that there's a spotted pattern on the face there and a striped pattern kind of on the legs. So there is that crossing of genes between the two parents. Again, though, because of the way the genes interact, both of these, the liger and the tigon, tend to be sterile. Other than a few really rare examples, they can't interbreed, they can't have offspring. So a liger is not a new species, and neither is a tigon. All right, now let's look at some funnier examples. If you took a dachshund, which I would just call a wiener dog, and you cross it with a basset hound, you can get a dachshund. If you take a Dachshund or wiener dog and a miniature pinscher, like a miniature Doberman, you get a Dachshund. If you get a wiener dog and a golden retriever, this one might kill you a little bit inside because of how cute this thing is. You get a golden shund. That just looks like something that some celebrity is going to pull out of a purse on TMZ. I don't watch TMZ. I don't. But that seems like something that would happen. What if you took a wiener dog and a boxer? Then you get a Dachsbull. I don't know why they come up with these names. Some of them are good. That one's, I feel like we could do better on that one. If you take a Dachshund and a French Bulldog, you get a Frenchend. Whatever. The idea here, though, is all of these are crosses between different breeds of dogs, not different species. So these are not new species because all dogs are the same species. All dogs came from essentially the same family tree that we think originated with a gray wolf ancestor in the beginning. So you can cross, as far as I know, any dog in the world can cross with any other dog in the world. And you would end up with potentially genetically viable, fertile offspring. Now, there are some cases where certain breeds, because of the genes they have, don't mix well with other breeds, and the offspring may not survive. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're different species. It just means that there's some complications because of that. And most of this selection that you're looking at on the page here, most of that comes because humans have selected for different traits. So, for example, did you know that wiener dogs were originally hunting dogs? Their long, skinny shape made them really good at going down the hole to chase foxes and other prey that would be down in those holes out for the hunters to get. So it was actually a hunting dog. Other dogs like the greyhound, something like this, are sleek. They've been bred for speed, right? To be long and slender and very fast. Other dogs have been bred to be guard dogs, to be aggressive, to be very muscular. So each of these breeds were originally started with the parent gray wolf, potentially. And because humans bred them for different things or because they adapted to their conditions, we end up with all of these different breeds of dogs, but they're all still the same species because we can get these weird combinations. And some of you might have cool combination dogs at home, like a Doberman and a poodle. Doberpoo. I don't know what you would call that. But some kind of a mixture like that. So that's the key with species. They have to look somewhat similar. And that's not really the defining characteristic. But the real defining one is they need to be able to interbreed and have viable, fertile offspring to be considered a new species.
Brendan Curl, please come to the office. Brendan Curl.
All right. Now let's look at a population. A population is all the members of the same species living in the same ecosystem or habitat at the same time. So there's kind of three parts to that you might want to look at. We need to have the same species in the same place, and they have to be at the same time. So contrary to the common use of the word population, where you could say the population of Cardston is roughly 3,500 people, the biological term, or the term in biology, is a little more specific. You have to say what species, in what place, and what time. So in biology, we would have to ask that same question to say, what is the population of humans in Cardston in 2020? That would be a more accurate question. If you just said what's the population, that doesn't give me enough information to answer from a biological standpoint. So same species, same place, same time. Those are the three things you have to be aware of to talk about a species. A community, on the other hand, is talking about that same area, potentially, an ecosystem or habitat, but all of the populations in that area. So if we talked about the community of Cardston, we'd be talking about all the humans and all the dogs and all the cats and all the hamsters and the guinea pigs and boa constrictors and whatever else people might have in their homes, the gophers, the mice, all of that together we would call the community. All those species combined. So make sure you don't get those confused. Population, single species, single place, single time. Community, all of the populations that are in that same area. All right, last part for this video. I'm going to try to keep the videos small so that you can kind of watch these in chunks as you have time, and it makes it easier to go back and review if you need to. The next thing we're going to look at is the different ecosystems and when they combine. So for example, around here we have a mountain ecosystem. Right? If you go drive that way, some of you live almost in the mountain ecosystem. You're going to have mountains and trees and lakes and higher altitudes, colder temperatures typically than the rest of us. A little bit more precipitation than you would get out on the prairies. We've also got the prairies, lower precipitation, warmer temperatures, lower elevation, things like that. These are two completely different ecosystems with different organisms growing and living in each ecosystem. But we end up with something interesting in the middle that we would call the foothills. It's this area between the two ecosystems where you get a blend of both. We call that an ecotone. So this is the area between ecosystems where organisms from both of those ecosystems can interact. And it tends to be a little bit more biodiverse area because you can get some species from both. You can have some of the grassland species, whether that's the plant life, the animal life, all of those things can also live in the foothills. Maybe not as well, depending on the species, but they can exist there. And you can have some species from the mountains coming out of the mountains. And you'll see, like in that picture, there's a few pine trees scattered around on the side of the hill, maybe shrub species, deer, all like bears, cougar, whatever. They're going to be more commonly found in that area, that ecotone in the middle, than you would find them out on the grassland. Doesn't mean it's impossible, but it's more likely that they're going to show up in that middle ecosystem, that area. So that's what we call, it's not, I guess I shouldn't say it's its own ecosystem, it's the ecotone. So we have the mountain ecosystem, we have the grassland ecosystem, and in the middle where the two are kind of fuzzy, where they might blend together a little bit, that's what we call an ecotone. So, and they do tend to be more biodiverse, that's important. Biodiversity, meaning just how many different living things are there, is important because when we look at biodiversity, it also affects how stable an area is biologically or ecologically. Well, I don't know why that took me so hard. I don't know why that was so hard for me to say. Ecologically, it's important because, for example, let's take a look at this food web. It's really complex, right? You've got a couple of different species of producers, a whole bunch of different species of primary consumers, a bunch of secondary and even some tertiary consumers, and a lot of interaction between all the different parts. We would consider this to be a fairly stable ecosystem, at least a stable food web, because there's so many different connections. If you had one of those connections that was, like, let's say the acacia tree down at the bottom here, let's say that one for some reason its population is endangered or is in trouble. Maybe there's a parasite, maybe there's a fire, something happened, maybe the trees aren't producing like they should. You'll notice that the only thing there would probably be the impala that would really be impacted by that change. And the things that are going to eat the impala up at the top, like maybe the cheetah or the lion, those things have other options. So if the impala population drops, we still have access to other ways that those organisms can survive. Now, it doesn't mean the ecosystem's not going to change. It just means that that ecosystem has some flexibility where we wouldn't necessarily lose the whole ecosystem because of a change in one area. On the other hand, if you had a very simple food web like the one up here, and this is not necessarily the only thing that's going on, but if this was your whole food web, phytoplankton are eaten by krill, which are eaten by the whale. If something happens in that food web, or in this case it's just a food chain, it's going to be devastating to everything else, right? If the krill population for some reason plummets, the whale will have no food or very little food. Where on this one, this more complex food web, they have options. There's other things they can eat. There's other things they can get. There's other ways they can get their energy and their nutrition. So the more complex the food web, the more complex the ecosystem is, the more biodiverse it is, the more stable we would consider it to be. The simpler food webs and less biodiverse areas we consider to be a little more fragile, because if anything happens to one of those pieces, if there's only 4 pieces interacting, that's a bigger change than if you've got 50 species all interacting. If one of those changes, it'll have some repercussions, but it may not be devastating to the area. So that's where we're probably going to stop for this video, and we'll pick it up with the next one. Again, if you have any problems or any questions, please let me know.